As the next day dawned, Odysseus had difficult decisions to make, for Circe, using her magic, had warned him of the dangers that lay ahead when he came across a narrow pass, and each side would lay incredible danger. With the right home to Scylla, a giant six-headed sea monster, and the left home to Copteros, a whirlpool that consumed anything that came near. The monster would take six of his men. It was a price he was willing to pay, as Cabdaros would take his entire ship, and so with a heavy heart he would direct his men towards the cliff face where Sella lay in wait. As the ship passed, six heads would swoop down from above each taking Sella, who screamed as they were consumed by the beast. But with a great storm on the horizon, they had no time to mourn, their companions with them soon stopping on the island of Thrinacia. Thrinacia was home to the cattle of the sun, god Helios' cattle that Odysseus had been warned not to consume by the prophet Teresus in the underworld, but despite Odysseus instructing his men not to touch the cattle, it would not be easy for them to follow his orders, as a storm had kept them stranded on the island for nearly a month. With their food supplies all but gone, the crew on the brink of starvation would wait for Odysseus to fall asleep, killing all the cattle and roasting the meat to enjoy amongst themselves. When Odysseus awoke in the next morning, he would fall to his knees in despair, shaking his head in disbelief, and to the foolishness of his crew. However, although the crew ignored his order, the storm had now come, with them sitting on the sea once again. But their crime had not some unnoticed, with the sign god Helios complaining to Zeus, the king of gods, about the slaughter of cattle furious. Zeus would strike Odysseus' ship with a great thunderbolt, leaving it in half, with all the crew drowning barren. For a fate predicted, Poseidon's course had come to pass, with only Odysseus having survived the carnage. For 9 days and nights he would drift across the vast ocean, but on the 10th day he would wash up on the island of the goddess Calypso. Upon rescuing Odysseus from the shore, Calypso, the daughter of the Titan Atlas, would fall in love with him, asking if he'd stay on the island with her forever, even offering to make him immortal. But Odysseus, longing to see his wife Penelope and his son Telemachus, would reject her advances, insisting that he wanted to leave. However, Calypso, insulted by his rejection, would keep Odysseus captive on the island for the next 7 years. Staying on the shore, wishing to see his wife and son once again. The goddess Athena, having supported Odysseus since the Trojan War, until one day she could not stand by any longer, he said to Zeus to finally allow Odysseus to return home, and Zeus, ordering Calypso to set him free. Reluctantly, Calypso would agree, helping Odysseus to build a raft to sail home. But as he way nearing his homeland, Poseidon would hear of Odysseus' escape, conjuring a storm to destroy his raft. Barely surviving, Odysseus managed to swim to the island of Syria and stumble on the shore completely naked before falling asleep. The island of Syria was home to the Phaeacians ruled by King Alcanas and Queen Arete. The day after Odysseus' arrival, their daughter Nausicaa would go down to the sea with her maids to wash their clothes, only to find Odysseus standing naked on the shore. Shocked by the sight of a naked man, her maids would run away screaming in terror. Giving Odysseus some clothes, Nausicaa would take him back to her palace, would she introduce him to her parents. The queen asked Odysseus to dine with them, before enjoying entertainment provided by Demodocus, the poet. As the night unfolded, the king would ask Odysseus to reveal his name and story, but Odysseus, reluctant to give his name after it had led to Poseidon's curse. Demodocus began to play his beautiful tones singing of the gods of Olympus. The crowd began to cheer, but only Odysseus, thinking only of the many friends he had lost, grabbed his robe and began wiping the tears from his eyes. However, the king, hearing Odysseus sobbing, would become suspicious, asking for the man's identity. Mesmerized by the poet's beautiful singing, he revealed that his name was Odysseus, the famous hero of the Trojan War, but rather that Returning home after the conflict, he explained his wandering the ocean for 10 long years. Amazed by the story and honored such a great hero in the midst, the king and queen would do anything to help him to return home. Odysseus thanked the king and queen with his eyes now set firmly upon his homeland. 20 years after leaving home, Odysseus would finally set foot on Ithaca, ready to see his wife and son once again. But Athena, knowing that his homeland was not as he had left it, would warn Odysseus of the dangers that waited in his palace, transforming him into an old beggar. Athena made sure that Odysseus would enter his home in disguise, for his wife Penelope, having been alone for 20 years, was expected to remarry with his suitors from far and wide, coming to win her hand, over 100 of them. With the deception lasting for 3 years before it was uncovered, with her now being forced to choose a suitor. But unknown to Penelope, Odysseus would soon to be by her side. Making his way to the palace, he would first stop at the house of his most loyal servant, Emmaus, happy to see his king once again. Emmaus would offer Odysseus food and wine. Telemachus had just arrived from home from his travels after searching for his father for many months. Making his way up to the palace, Telemachus would see Emmaus dine in with a stranger and hungry. After his long voyage, would ask his friend if he could join for dinner, but Emmaus, knowing the beggar's true identity, would seek to give the two some time together, leaving to let Penelope know that her son had returned. Athena used her magic to transform the old beggar back into Odysseus. In all his glory, Telemachus could not believe his eyes and would begin to weep, having been reunited with his father after all this time. Dropping to his knees, Telemachus would embrace his father with open arms. But their reunion would have to wait as for now. Odysseus would have to deal with the suitors that infested his home. Disguising himself as a beggar once again, Odysseus would enter the palace only to discover that Penelope had set a competition to choose her next husband. The only thing left to do was to reunite with his wife, with his undying love for her being the only thing that had fueled his journey. Home recognizing his husband and overwhelmed with emotion, Penelope would embrace Odysseus a moment she had spent 20 long and faithful years waiting for him. His wife would have one question for him, asking where he had been after all this time. He replied with one simple line, "Where do I begin?" Telemachus had just arrived home from his travels after searching for his father for many months. Making his way up to the palace, Telemachus would see Emmaus dine in with a stranger and hungry. After his long voyage, would ask his friend if he could join for dinner, but Emmaus, knowing the beggar's true identity, would seek to give the two some time together, leaving to let Penelope know that her son had returned, with Emmaus now gone. Athena would use her magic to transform the old beggar back into Odysseus in all his glory. Telemachus would not believe his eyes and would begin to weep, having been reunited with his father. After all this time, dropping to his knees, Telemachus would embrace his father with open arms. But their union would have to wait, as for now, Odysseus would have to deal with the suitors that infested his home. Disguising himself as a beggar once again, Odysseus would but their reunion would have to wait, as for now, Odysseus would have to deal with the suitors that infested his home. Disguising himself as a beggar once again, Odysseus would enter the palace only to discover that Penelope had set up a competition to choose her next husband. The only thing left to do was reunite with his wife, With his undying love for her being the only thing that had fueled his journey home, recognizing his husband, and overwhelmed,
Overwhelmed.
with his undying love for her being the only thing that had fueled his journey home, recognizing his husband, and overwhelmed with emotion, Penelope would embrace Odysseus, a moment she had spent 20 long and faithful years waiting for. His wife would have one question for him, asking where he had been after all this time. He replied with one simple line, "Where do I begin?"